सर आप start कर सकते हैं सर.
Okay, okay. So
गोपालन.
good morning everyone. It's a pleasure to be back again this Sunday, and I want to welcome our speaker, Mr. S Gopalan. You have heard him earlier, so I'll briefly introduce him. Mr. Gopalan is a chartered accountant, but while working in industry, it was his fortune to come into contact with Krishnaji, and he heard him in 1980. He and his wife Soha joined the Valley School as parents in 92 and became teachers in 1983. He is now 70 years old and resides on the campus of the Valley School. Mr. Gopalan has written 3 books in the last 3 years. The first one was written in 2019, Bud to Blossom, in which he explores creativity. And in 2020, he published another book, 1+1 Infinity or Eternity, Exploring Intelligence, Operating Thought. This year, he has published another book called Insight, Obscured by Intellect, Living, Learning, Education. So I'm very happy that Mr. Gopalan has agreed to speak to this group. And he is going to talk to us today on insight, so near and yet so far. With these words, I welcome Mr. S. Gopalan once again, and I'll request him to please go ahead and do your talk, after which we'll have question and answer session. So you can speak for about an hour. Mr. Gopalan, yes, please.
Good morning, all. I won't talk for 1 hour. I try to do it for half an hour so we can have more voices that we listen to.
Okay, perfect.
Right. In Krishnamurti's talks, especially in the context of schools, we hear a lot of talks related to knowledge and the fact that knowledge is limited. Now, this observation that knowledge is limited is a very, very ancient observation. It is illustrated, for example, by the parable of the 6 blind men who see an elephant. This parable is part of Hinduism, Jain, Buddhist lore, and in 1872, an English poet by the name of John Godfrey Saxe, he composed this little poem called The 6 Blind Men of Hindustan. And the ending of that poem was, though each was partly in the right and all were in the wrong. So that shows that the limitation of knowledge has always been understood, and yet knowledge has been given extraordinary importance. Now, through all these discussions and dialogues, it's very evident that knowledge is not learning. There is a big difference between knowledge and learning. But knowledge has an intimate connection with learning. For most of us, learning means storing in the brain the result of any experience and using that information stored to take all decisions in the future. This is purely an intellectual activity. And having done this from a very young age, we are quite conditioned to assume that learning is an activity of the intellect. That intellect learns is the assumption that we work with all the time. And this is a conditioning that is almost impossible to break. Almost. Now, we know that knowledge is the result of a process. It's the end result of a process. Are the result and the process separate activities or one continuum? Obviously, they are one continuum. Which comes first, the process or the end? Again, it's obvious that the process comes first. So we know that wrong means cannot give you the right ends. The means is the ends. So why do we give importance to knowledge at all? All we need to be giving importance to is the process. Whatever the process is will produce its result. So why give importance and even attention to this whole business and importance of knowledge at all? Now, Krishnamurti points out that generally knowledge is accumulated in two ways. One, you get information, then obtain experience, and then accumulate the knowledge. Or first you get the experience, which results in the knowledge. But both these are in the realm of knowledge. He also points out that there is a third way of accumulating knowledge which is outside this process, and that is this process which he called insight, an instant perception into the entirety of things and acting instantly from that insight and perception. Now, Krishnamurti has explored insight, probably not as much as he has explored knowledge, and somewhere insight is given less importance in our explorations and discussions than knowledge and learning is. Krishnamurti also uses brain and mind, two terms which sometimes we assume are interchangeable. But when you listen to him carefully, there is a clear distinction between the brain and the mind. The brain is part of the body. I'm sorry, one moment. The electricity has gone here. Just a moment.
We can see you.
Yeah, yeah. My computer is giving a little. I just in a moment I'll be.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Yes. So the brain is clear. It is part of the body. And what is the mind? Mind, in Krishnamurti's words, mind is speech, thought, consideration, understanding. It is all these and it is also feeling. You cannot separate feeling from thinking. The mind and heart are in themselves complete. But because we have created innumerable escapes through conflict, there arises the idea of thought as apart from feeling, as apart from action, and hence our life is broken up, incomplete. So one can see that without the brain, there can be no perception. Is the mind required for perception to happen? This is really the core of the question that I am throwing up today. Now we know that there is first there is contact. From contact arises sensation. Sensation is perceived, and after that perception, thought arises, giving place to recognition, analysis, and expression. Now, the interesting question is, where does perception occur? The default assumption is it occurs through thought. But this process can be observed in oneself. It doesn't require anybody to explain it. It can be validated through one's own experience. There is the contact, there is sensation, there is perception, and thought rises a moment after or even an instant afterwards. It seems a continuous one process, but it isn't. This can be observed. So, obviously, perception doesn't arise within the thought intellect. So, perception can happen only when the brain exists, but thought doesn't have to exist for perception to arise at all. This is crucial to understanding whether learning is of thought or intellect or outside of thought intellect. Does the brain imply automatically that thought arises? Can the brain function without the rising of thought? Obviously, yes. In attention, or when is completely immersed in an activity, or in the moments when one has just awakened from sleep, the brain is active, it is perceiving, but thought is not showing its head as yet. Again, there are times when we act instantly. When you step on a thorn without noticing it, or if you live in a outside the urban area and you step on a snake and instantly realize that you have stepped on a snake and jump. This is not thought out activity. This is the body just reacting to the perception of the sensation that it has received. So, brain does function without thought arising. So, clearly, insight and perception arise through the brain before thought has arisen. A living brain in a living body is mandatory for insight and perception. Without this combination, when you say brain, you mean a body because the brain can't survive without the body, it's part of the body. So, a brain body that is alive is a must for perception. But insight and perception cannot happen without this brain body. And this is the gift of a body. In that, if there is a state of living outside the body, the disembodied state, that disembodied state logically cannot have perception because it doesn't have a body. Human birth has this gift of a body and the gift of thought intellect. This is the human opportunity which has been stressed repeatedly in the Indian spiritual heritage that it's an extraordinarily precious gift. Don't waste it. Use it for the purpose that it is meant to use, which, if put in Krishnamurti's words, would be break through your fear, understand conflict. So, if insight arise in perception arise in the brain, what very clearly, when thought arises an instant later, it obscures that insight like a cloud obscuring the sun. And it seems that this is a binary process like an electric switch. If thought has arisen, then insight perception are obscured. Only one can be active at any point in time, both cannot be active. Now, continuously using thought intellect makes us get used to this state of obscuring insect of insight to the point that we assume that it is actually thought intellect which is having that insight. And the example of this in today's context is wearing of this mask because of COVID. I'm sure when you first wear that mask, uh, you don't feel easy breathing through that mask, especially if you are walking a bit or exercising a bit. There is a feeling of suffocation inside that. because not only have we impeded the availability of air, we are rebreathing the air that has been breathed out. But over a period of time, using that mask continuously, it becomes second nature, and we assume that that is the normal. We don't question that after that. A question that arises here is, what makes thought arise? If perception and insight are happening in the brain, through the brain, without the rising of thought, what makes thought arise? Can it arise by itself? Thought is not a living thing. It's simply a field that rises when memory is illuminated by the energy of life. So, what makes thought arise? Uh, there is the example in our day to day world of the electric wire, the electric conductor. When electricity flows through that conductor, a magnetic field gets created around the wire. The moment the electricity is switched off, the magnetic field collapses. Is thought like this? Once life enters the brain and illuminates the memory, is it inevitable that the field of thought must rise and collapse only when that life energy withdraws? To take it a little further, is desire, motive, the reason why thought arises? If there is no desire at all, no motive at all, would thought arise? Now, in Hindu and Buddhist theology, they take the stand that desires come together in a body to work themselves out. Especially the Tibetan Book of the Dead describes this in graphic detail. And therefore, so long as there is the just one moment, if you don't mind. Yeah, thank you. So long as there is the desire that has that is there waiting to express itself, then there is no avoiding that desire to come over. So many spiritual teachers in the Indian background have talked about the need to destroy desire completely, destroy the mind. This, I think, has been misunderstood to uh, mean that it's one part of thought trying to dominate the other part of thought. But it is simply the recognition that so long as there is a memory which is active, which has been instigated by desire, till then this cannot be ended. And therefore, the root of desire has to be killed. Uh, I would say that it is just an expression in a different way. Krishnamurti talks about watching desire so that without trying to control it, so that it flowers and withers. Uh, to me, it's just a difference in expression. This naturally brings us to the next question. Can insight perception be invited? And that begs the question, who is it that is inviting it? Is that not again another thought? And so long as it's a thought, can it, so long as it's a thought, is there not a motive? And if it's a motive, again, are we not in the same boat? So any deliberate act of thought wanting to invite insight is again this, has the seed of desire in it. So can thought which obscures insight facilitate the coming of insight? Has effort any place or role in this process? And I think here again, there is tremendous misunderstanding really of Krishnamurti's words when he points out that all effort is an act of thought, an act of will, and therefore effort is limited. That doesn't mean that there is nothing one has to do, there is no preparation required. I think that is something that has to be resolved for oneself very clearly. So it seems the negative approach, negating the false, is one way of doing it. When you negate the false, what remains is the truth. Now, that negation is by thought intellect. And this is the gift of the human birth, the extraordinary gift which gives the discriminating ability to discriminate and discard. And that is a faculty that's available, it seems, only to the humans in all the sentient beings. To approach this from another side, we live by sensation. In a day, uh, the five senses must be generating over 1 million sensory impulses in 24 hours. Now, every one of these sensory impulses is perceived by the brain. Very few of them really result in thought, making thought arise. You can take the example of walking, taking a walk outside, especially when there is a serious preoccupation in the mind, some problem that one is mulling over. You come back from the walk and you can't really recall whom you crossed on the way, how far you walked, because the mind was preoccupied with its own problem. But the brain perceived all those sensory impulses. So then the question comes, who is it that perceives? We said the brain is required for perception to happen. But the brain itself cannot perceive. It's an inanimate part of the body. Therefore, logically, all perception can only be of that life energy, which is really what energizes the brain and the body. So, it is life energy which has insight, it is life energy which perceives, not thought intellect. Now, life energy perceives every sensory impulse 1 million times a day. Can insight perception be any closer than this? 1 million times a day, which means practically every second. So we are in contact with that. It's just that have we allowed our thought intellect to obscure it, and then we look for insight to be invited from outside, from somewhere far away. Taking a cue from my friend Rajaram's talk of last week, where he pointed out wisdom of other cultures, in the Indian tradition, knowledge is a result of 6 steps. The first step is pratyaksha, that is self experience, or in our language, experiencing. Then there is logical conclusion, comparison with examples and other similar situations, factual extrapolation, negative conclusion, and finally, word. These 6 processes together give us knowledge. Of these 6, the first one is experiencing, and all the other 5 are activities of thought intellect. So, without that first experiencing, there can be no knowledge. So, the it's the same message all along, that everything begins with experiencing. But the moment one has entered the realm of intellectual processes, the intellectual processes then create their own world of imagination, where we can logically analyze, we can compare with similarities, we can extrapolate, we can negate, and we can express through words. All that is intellectual activity, which means we are no more in contact with that act of experiencing anymore. So experiencing is the root. And to quote one from Krishnamurti, Are you learning, or have you gathered some information which has become knowledge and you say that knowledge will act, which is one process? Or listening, you are learning. So, experiencing, observing, listening, in all these is thought in operation. Brain certainly is in operation, but is thought in operation? So it is not thought that experiences, observes, listens. That arises after the event of listening. Now, I would like to close this talk with one passage of Krishnaji, which I found in 1936. It's not a passage that we normally get to listen to or read. I'll read it out, and after that, I will post it in the chat box so you can deliberate on it later if you wish. This is a question put to him at Ojai. The question is: you said last Sunday that most people are not self conscious. It seems to me that quite the contrary is true, and that most people are very self conscious. What do you mean by self conscious? And Krishnamurti's answer: this is a difficult and subtle question to answer in a few words, but I will try to explain it as well as I can. And please remember that words do not convey all the subtle implications involved in the answer. Every living thing is force, energy, unique to itself. This force or energy creates its own materials, which can be called the body, sensation, thought, or consciousness. This force or energy, in its self acting development, becomes consciousness. From this, there arises the I process, the I movement. Then begins the round of creating its own ignorance. The I process begins and continues in identification with its own self created limitations. The I is not a separate entity as most of us think. It is both the form of energy and energy itself. But that force, in its development, creates its own material, and consciousness is a part of it. And through that, the senses, consciousness becomes known as the individual. This I process is not of the moment, it is without a beginning. But through constant awareness and comprehension, this I process can be ended. Thank you very much. And now we can dialogue about it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Gopalan. I think you have very well covered knowledge, distinction between brain and mind, and talked about perception and insight. Uh, Talking about brain and mind, Krishna has many times used one for the other. But at one place, he talks about the clear distinction where he says that brain is a part of the physical body, which is the center of cognition. It stores all our knowledge, our experience, our conditionings, everything. And the mind, which may not even be a part of the physical body, has insight, compassion, and all that. Now, the brain cannot influence the mind, but the mind, whatever it perceives, is manifested through the brain. So, things like insight or compassion or awareness, these are things which come in a very mysterious way and, of course, get manifested through the brain. But in normal processes, every inquiry has to begin with thought. But if it ends at thought, then of course it becomes an intellectual inquiry. Giving a metaphor, just like a pole vaulter, where he uses the pole to reach the height, but he has to let go of the pole in order to cross over. So that is the use of knowledge. Beyond that, where from that energy comes and all that, is very difficult to explain. So this is a very difficult area. We had had lots of discussions on this with psychologists in Rajghat, and people had different opinions on this. So I really don't know what it means. But I want to end it here, and I would like Harshji and Harshad Bhai is also here. So say a few things before we take questions. I know Dineshji wants to say something, but I'll go to Harshji to say something for about 10-15 minutes. Then we'll go to Harshad Parekh and then to Dinesh Vagmare. Yes, please, Harshji, please unmute yourself.
Yeah. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
First, let me say something about brain and mind. I'm cheating here. Can you see this?
Okay.
I have in front of me a little booklet made in, I don't know whether it's available generally. It's called Brain and Mind and has excerpts in it from, so right at the beginning, it's Krishnaji says, 18th July 1978, in case you want to know. I mean by mind, the brain, the movement of thought, consciousness, the whole content of our consciousness, the senses, all that is the mind. I'm using the word in that sense. We may alter it later on, use a different word, but for now, we are using mind to convey all that. This is 18th July 1978. 3 years later, he says this. A questioner asks him, you often switch from mind to brain. Is there any difference between them? If so, what is the mind? Krishnamurti says, I'm afraid it's a slip of the tongue that I have often said the mind, the brain. I apologize for that. I was talking only about the brain, right? So you have to be very careful when listening to Krishnamurti. He is, in fact, not just mind, brain, but virtually every word he uses, religion, love, meditation, you have to take them in context. You have to listen to the whole talk and remember this, that every word, anything that is said, anything that all of us say, firstly, is said in a context, and that context gives it the meaning at that time. We use the word love, we may use it every day in a certain way, saying to somebody, I love you. In that context, it has a certain meaning. And the other thing is, every word also carries a subtext. It has an underlying meaning, which is not immediately apparent. Political parties often have a huge subtext under everything that they say. So we are always, the context and subtext are things we have to be aware of all the time. And this question of mind and brain is, I think the best thing we can say, hope for, is that it's actually this ambiguity between mind and brain. What it tells us is that we have to exercise our own observation and awareness of what it is, what is involved here, so that we're observing for ourselves what the mind is, what the brain does, and not relying on any description by Krishnamurti, but we are checking it out for ourselves. What is the mind? What is the brain? What could be called the mind in my experience, so this is, I think, an important way of listening to Krishnamurti's words. And the other thing that interested me is, which suddenly struck me, was that Gopalanji was talking about the process And the ends, we are often concerned about the ends, but we should be concerned about the process. But I would suggest that actually what Krishnaji is talking about is the beginnings, neither the process nor the end. That he is saying that something that is necessary to even begin to look at this thing is a frame of mind which is not being colored by thought. And if there's anything that he's doing, all his words are a pointer to that they're saying that, explore, inquire, find out for yourself what it means to have that quality of mind that is not being influenced by the past, which is not being structured by the past. And what is, because that's what is necessary if you're going to see the truth of something. Otherwise, it will be colored by thought. So the beginning is really, I think, what it is all about. There are many things that are said by Gopalanji, and I think this is a problem we always have. Is as Gopalanji referred to the six blind men or wise men, or different traditions have a slightly different story. Let me tell you the Sufi version. I met with a Sufi scholar who told me that the Sufi scholar, it's a dark room and there's an elephant in the dark room, and they all look at it, and one of them says, it's like a snake. And the other one says, no, it's like a tree trunk, because he's looking at the one who's looking at the elephant's trunk says it's a snake. The one who encounters its leg says it's like a tree trunk. Somebody touches the side of the elephant and says it's a wall, and so on. Another one touches the ears. So they all have different descriptions, right? In the Sufi version, which is different from the others, a light comes on. So they're all enlightened, if you like. and then they see, not only do they see what it is, but they also see how it is possible that all of them are describing the same thing in different ways according to their experience. So anything that I am saying, anything that Gopalanji is saying, are all attempts to describe what we are seeing or perceiving, but in a few words, in a short time, with the limitation of words, because words are never going to be completely describing anything. It is always going to be partial. It is always going to be a part that we are describing, and that it is the function of the listener who's inquiring, not to get too caught up in what the details of what is being said. Is it a snake or is it a tree trunk? Tell me why you think it's a tree trunk. And then you say, oh no, it's round. Not get up too caught in that, but instead be asking this question: how is it possible that different people, what is it, what could be there, that different people are describing it in these different ways? So I think it requires an active listening, which is, of course, what Krishnamurti always encouraged, that you're not just following or trying to understand my words and meaning, but that you are actively inquiring yourself to see what in your own perception could be described in this way. If you do that, then you may begin to discover that different religions are perhaps trying to talk about the same thing, just in different ways, and to go to war over the different ways that they are describing this thing is absolutely crazy. So this is another thought that came to me. Another thought that came to me is in response to what Gopalanji said about experiencing, right? This is a long topic, and I would maybe sometimes like to give you a demonstration or talk about this. But I would suggest that what is being called experiencing already involves a function of the brain and the thought, and thought without us being ever aware that it's happening. And thought acts very, very early on in the process, very early on, long before we are even aware, and long before we experience anything that we start calling thought. Thought is already in action. But I would perhaps, if you want to, actually show you a demonstration sometime of how this happens. Yeah. But I think that's all I have to say for now.
Thank you, Harshdeep. Thank you. Very well said. Harshad Bhai, would you like to say something, sir? We can't hear you. We can't hear you. Some problem with the audio.
Are you able to hear?
Yes, we
Yeah,
can.
yeah.
Okay, all right. Yeah, on this group, Indore study JK, we had 4 dialogues on brain and mind. So I will not talk about that. But once Krishnaji said to an artist who was depressed, he was a good artist, but something went wrong. And in that dialogue, Krishnaji says, the word parrot has blocked you from looking at the thing which flies. So I found that sentence very remarkable. It's like some insight comes, the thing, the word is not the thing. And all our dialogue, discussions are through words, and that can really take us in a different direction than actually looking non-verbally. And that is an amazing thing. If we can look at a tree or a face of a human being without this word coming in, that would be a real looking fresh, as if looking at something new. And such a thing is possible even after we have learned so much. We have studied so many subjects. Generally, what happens that after learning so many subjects, and we are thinking becomes like a habit, and we are not able to look in the fresh, non-verbal way. But people who are deeply interested in and looking within oneself, how these thoughts are arising, and to look at the thoughts arising, it itself requires a mind which is very, very quiet and attentive and curious and motiveless. So that's why Krishnaji says freedom is at the beginning to really look at anything. And such a thing can happen. Now, what I like to say is that what we call mind is made up of thoughts and feelings, and these thoughts and feelings are mostly very active on the surface layer of the mind. And this what we call awareness, that is not functioning. It is hidden under the dense layers of thoughts and feelings. And if by chance there is a discontinuity happens in our thinking, there is a space created between two thoughts, then that awareness which is hidden under, it can come up through the gap between the two thoughts, and then the awareness can come come above and look at the thoughts clearly. So thinking is not the problem in our life. Thinking will always be there. But this awakening of awareness, which can look at thinking as it is arising, and that is in a different dimension. This awareness is in a different dimension than thinking. So when this awareness is awakened, then all these problems which are created, like fear, anger, jealousy, violence, loneliness, boredom, all these psychological problems can be seen at the root. And when it is seen through this awareness, non-verbal awareness, that that looking becomes the action, and it dissolves all the problems of psychological nature. And this is what Krishna ji has been saying, and he says in the light of awareness, all problems created by thinking, psychological problems, are dissolved. So our main thing is that we are living mostly in thinking and feeling, and this awareness is hidden under. And though we may use the word aware, there may be no awareness. It's just a word, not the real thing. Awareness is non-verbal, and then it can look at everything very clearly. So, okay, I have finished. Thank you.
Thank you, Arshad bhai. Thank you. Dinesh ji, please go ahead. And then Dakshinamurti ji.
Sir, today we are talking of insight. I am having, are you able to listen to me, sir?
Yes,
Gopalan,
yes.
sir?
Okay. Yeah, yeah.
Sir, I am having only 3 questions, simple. Is insight mystical? Number 1. Number 2, can insight be without perception? And third, is insight is fragmented also?
Mr. Gopalan.
Sir,
Unmute yourself, sir. Unmute.
kindly unmute yourself.
Yeah, your first question, if you don't mind, can you just say it again?
Is insight mystical?
Yeah. Is life mystical? Because insight is life energy itself. So whatever is life energy, can insight be any different from that? And
Okay.
the same thing would apply to the second question. Your second question was, can you just say it again?
Yeah. Can it be without perception?
Yeah. So insight, perception, all these are qualities of that life energy itself. Are they different? It is our intellect which is splitting the two, is it not?
Sir, you said that because of perception, insight comes or can come. But Krishnamurti also referred about the creativity. When the mind is very quiet, then there can be creativity. So that creativity is also a sort of insight, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm suggesting that they are all different qualities of life energy itself. Insight, perception, creativity, attention, all these, listening, observation, all these are at the level of life energy. They are not different.
So it automatically means that it can be fragmented also.
The fragmentation is by thought intellect coming in. That is what fragments, obscures, divides, creates the disconnect between that direct perception, is it not?
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Mr. Dakshinamurti has a question. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Yeah, am I audible, sir?
Yes.
Yeah, good morning, sir. Thanks for the talk. My first question is like this. For insight to happen, a silent mind is a prerequisite, is it not? Unless the silent mind is there, how can perception or insight take place? My second question is, okay, I will ask it later, sir, after you answer this question.
Okay. So when we say silent mind, what do we mean? Do we not mean a mind that is not made noisy by thought?
Yeah.
which is what I was trying to say, that the noise created by thought is obscuring the intellect. But one thought cannot decide that the rest of thought will be quiet. That's again a fight going on at this level. One can only be aware, as Harsh pointed out, can we be aware of the beginning, the moment when thought arises? It is true that it's very difficult to do that, because we become aware long after thought has arisen, but it is still a linear process. So is it possible to be aware of thought as it is rising? Can one be that attentive?
Harishi has a question. Yes, sir. Please go ahead.
Okay, first of all, namaskar to everyone. And thank you very much. Not exactly a question, but like a catalyst, if I can share a few words that aids and promotes the dialogue further, helping Gopalan sir. Sir, just like no analogy can explain better the function of human heart than a pump. So a biology teacher, easily and naturally resorts to drawing a map of pump and all that and compares. Same way, to a layman like me, nothing probably would explain to me better than the analogy of hardware and software. Brain is the hardware. Like hardware is tactile, palpable. We can feel it. Software we cannot. Mind is software. Yes, we cannot see the software, we can see the results. Like right now we are able to hear each one of us, and we are able to see because apparently some software is involved, so we are seeing the result of the software, but we cannot see. Just like we see the reflection of light, but light itself cannot be seen. So I think the difference between brain and mind should not be the bone of contention, but one thing, sir, and we have to remember it. Whenever Krishnaji said it, and he never tired of saying it, he said that, sir, there is mutation in every brain cell. Krishnaji has used brain and mind as Harsh Tankha said. Of course, he has used, interchangeably, but we need not be, get stuck in that. But when he talks about the brain cells undergoing mutation, he never uses the word mind. And with all humility, if I can, as a teacher of language, if I can play with words, it is the death of the mind as we have, like me, I'm talking about myself. The death of the mind is the regeneration of brain, the death of the mind. And mind means what? All the what Dr. Parekh said, the image about the tree and flower and anything. So, but there is one thing. So their brain and mind are clearly separate. But one thing, sir, Krishnaji was never categorical about one question about the theory of reincarnation and karma, but he did not deny it altogether. His stand was, I clearly remember, whether it was his JJ School of Arts talk way back in 1977 January, or Rishi Valley, or wherever, he has said it is the death of the physical organism, physical body. The body ceases to exist. But if you are jealous, envious, ambitious, if you have lots of desire, they continue exactly with the same momentum. That is why I say that change now, after death, otherwise they will continue. I have a question, otherwise I have no question. I have a question. Isn't it possible that if the desire, if brain is really the seat of that, insight or whatever, or perception, then of course, after death, according to Krishnamurti, desire, the momentum of desire will happen. but not the perception. But if, as the Hindu mystics say, this human body is very gross, otherwise we have subtle body of, Manomaya Kosh, Anandamaya Kosh, and all kinds of Kosh, subtler and subtler bodies. So isn't it possible that brain, of course, is an instrument of insight, wisdom, or intelligence? But just like our snake and reflex action, probably there is the intelligence stored in every cell of the body. So when I step on the snake, there is no time for the impulse to be carried to the brain, interpreted, and the decision again carried back to the feet. No, the local self-government, so to say, with its intelligence acts. So, sir, you can throw some light on that. Is that perception possible even after the death of the physical body?
Thank you, Harishji. Thank you. Mr. Ramarao has a question. Yes, please, Mr. Ramarao, please go ahead.
Yeah, sir, my question is that when you say this perception and insight, it is a part of life energy, and this thought, sensation, body also forms through this same life energy. Now, how it differentiated between two?
I will give you the example of the computer hardware software which Harish ji talked about. There is the hardware of the computer, the electronics of it, and there is the software which gives all the instructions to the hardware. But neither of the two can function unless the required electricity is flowing through that computer. And therefore, the energy is flowing through, and it allows these two to act. By themselves, they can't act. So the body can't act on its own, nor can thought act on its own. Both use the same energy. So it's the life energy manifesting in the body, it's the life energy manifesting in thought, and therefore through either of them, it is possible to get in touch with that energy. It gives you the connection, does it not?
Do we have more questions? Yes, Mr. Ramarao, please unmute yourself. Unmute. Yeah.
So the analogy you mentioned, I couldn't get it. Can you say a bit clear?
Sir, take our own body. Let's not go to the computer, right? Is our body alive? We assume our body is alive. What is this living body? Biology tells us that the entire cells of the body continuously change. There is nothing in us with which we were born. The cells have been continuously changing. So cells are dying all the time, but new cells are also being produced all the time. So living seems to be a balance. What we produce matches what dies, and therefore we are alive. But what do we mean when we say a cell is alive? The cell is material, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, none of them are alive by themselves. So this living quality, this life, energy, can that ever be destroyed? It may leave the body, but can it be destroyed? So you don't need a theory of reincarnation there. It is obvious that the energy must be moving somewhere. But we have so identified ourselves with this body, mind, and the images that come with that. We don't question that identification, this image of me. And all our fears, all our questions actually arise from this question of me. What happens if I die? I will die, which means I will end. And there comes the big problem with which all of us get stuck. Is it not?
Okay. We take another question now. Mr. Murthy, please unmute yourself. And then Durgaji.
Sir, are you getting me?
Yes. Yes.
My question is like this. The second question, I read your book, Eternity and Infinity, and I cannot claim that I understood it fully, but I have a question. As Krishnaji says, all time is now, which is the past, the future, and the present, all are all there in the eternal now. That is understandable because the person who is acting in the now, the observer, is a bundle of past memories. So he is carrying the past with him. Likewise, whatever he is doing in the now, with that he is creating the future. So past and future are in the now. That is understood. But the other point where I need your clarification, Krishnaji talks of the past meeting the present and ending it there. And when the past ends there, it is the eternal now. What does it mean and how can it happen?
Sir, if you look at this passage which I read out at the end of the talk, which I have now put through the chat box, I'll read again one part from that. But that force in its development creates its own material, and consciousness is a part of it. And through the senses, consciousness becomes known as the individual. This I process is not of the moment, it is without a beginning. But through constant awareness and comprehension, this I process can be ended. I think in that is everything, is it not?
Okay, we go to Durga ji. Please go ahead and ask your question. Yeah.
Yes. Good morning, sir. Yeah, Gopal sir. Yeah, actually, when I listened to your talk, a lot of things were not very clear to me. Like, what is the what is the content pointing to? Like, what is the question kind of? And when I read, your topic, the name of the topic, inside so far, yet inside so close, yet so far. That itself is a bit suggestive, but I don't know what I could gather after the talk. What do you about the your choosing that particular title of your today's session. I just would like to contribute as a layperson, okay, whatever I could gather from the books and all. In Krishnamurti's books, like case books, very often we come across this statement. When you ask the right question, the heavens are open for you. So, and how can you make out what is the right question at all? And that is one part of it. And as you rightly said, in the Krishnamurti books, we don't come across he discussing so much about insight. What is not inside, that he says in hundreds and thousands of ways. The knowledge, and what are the dangers of the knowledge, in how many ways it can, affect our perceptions and our seeing, and, so that one can start going towards a little bit of clarity at least, So that's the reason maybe like, he never discussed so much about the insight. That's my take, sir. And regarding the other point, I would like to say, I think insight and the inquiry, they are both related. Like when you have the questions, in some form or the other, when you are connected with the teaching, there is so much of relevance in whatever he is talking. He is talking about our practical life issues. He's not talking about some, mystical issues of far off times or something like that. Our day-to-day life issues he is talking about. And what's happening exactly in the world, he's talking about. So somewhere when you got connected with them, and when you start reflecting, and when you start leaving out all this other jargon of what is thought or what is awareness, whatever it is, if you're connected with it and you want to implement, we want to kind of bring out a little bit of clarity to your own day-to-day life. So somewhere the questions start coming. I feel the insight and the inquiry, they both are related. So when once your day-to-day life is setting in order, then the next questions come. And in this way, nobody can help you. And you can't depend on knowledge. Knowledge is important so that you can bring out some clarity to your questions. Some base is important. But to go even further, you just have to keep waiting for with the questions. He says if you have that depth to your questions, to inquiry, maybe the question reveals itself. I think the insight and inquiry, they both are related, sir. The deeper your question is, the deeper the understanding is. The question is maybe, what does he mean by it? Or what does he mean by truth? What does he mean by true and false? Unless and until when one doesn't ask questions, when one is not inquiring into it, I think that doesn't settle it. Uh, Enormous discussion about thought, awareness, consciousness, that's all a part of it. But apart from that, whatever he stated, our human behavior, human conditioning, human problems, they are so true to the core. So when you're touched from this, maybe I just want to come to the basic question of, insight. How does it happen? Maybe they are related to inquiry. When the deeper the inquiry, maybe the insight comes on its own. And when you're not asking it, when you're not looking for it, maybe it comes. That's all I would like to contribute, sir. Thank you, sir.
So, you see, if I connect up what you said with what Harsh raised about the beginning, we think inquiry again is of the intellect. The question is articulated through the intellect, through language. But the question is not of the intellect. Question comes from that life energy itself. So, insight, inquiry, as you pointed out, are one. It's only the expression of it which comes out through the intellect. And the moment the intellect has risen, it has started obscuring that intellect. Is it possible to be aware in oneself that moment, that instant when thought rises? Because thought does rise and thought does submerge. If that is happening, it's possible to be aware of it. But it points out what is the level of attention, quietness, space that one has to have within oneself. Why you should take a retreat, withdraw from activity, because all these take the mind outward. And to be able to watch that thought rising means to have minimal distractions taking the mind outward, does it not?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Gopalan. I think we have Dr. Harshad Parekh and then Mr. Dinesh Wagmare. Harshad.
Are you able to hear?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. About the right question, in my life, I did not ask any question. I'm just interested in looking at what is happening, how these thoughts are arising. And so if a person wants a question, the right question could be, is it possible to look at the beginning of a thought? And if a person is really deeply interested, then something else other than thought is required to look at the beginning of a thought. So when this question is very genuine question, and when one looks inward, it may happen that nothing is coming, as if the thought is suppressed. And at that time, it is a wonderful state of having no thought. But for most people, it is very frightening state that there is no thought. It means there is no I. It is like a psychological death. And out of fear, people don't want to look inward, and they involve in some outward activity like that. And uh, something Krishnaji talked about is the mutation of the brain cells. And it is also there in our traditional philosophy that when the energy goes to the brain is transformed. It's like the energy they call Kundalini, which starts from the base of the spine and it goes to the brain, and the brain becomes very highly vibrant. And then uh, uh, some different way of looking at objects, at people, at nature, it happens. So such a thing I would call a insight, when this energy, the brain has got a different quality to look at everything. And then it can look at things outside, and it can look at the thoughts arising. And those thoughts, they don't create any problem. The problem is not suppressing of thoughts, but just looking at it, and looking at from a different dimension than thinking. Okay, I finished.
Thank you, Ashadi. Yes, Dinesh ji, please go ahead.
Sir, my question is, if the insight is the property of life force energy, then can it not come despite of thought?
Actually, it does. It comes all the time. But our thought keeps clouding it by assuming that it is on and then imagining on it and living in our imagination. So it's like a cloud coming in between the sun and me. The cloud obscures the sun, but the sun is always shining behind.
Okay. And it has to come in some context only, no?
Context again is something which our thought creates, is it not? Life acts. If I'm just willing to watch with it, it will always do it, because there is always provocation in the world. There is always contact, there is always sensation, which means there is always insight happening. But why at that, with the moment somebody says COVID, why that fear arises from COVID? What is this fear? Is it fear of something happening because of the pandemic? Or is it the fear, the realization actually, that all our knowledge, technology, skills are useless in the face of this invisible virus, and therefore we feel completely stuck? Is that the fear? And is that why, that is that contributed to by the kind of education we have, which puts so much information on technology, on creation of the intellect? Corona has come, now we have to find the vaccine, we have to destroy. It's always a war. But is the universe in a state of war? What is coexistence?
But you mean to say that stimulus will always be there?
Clemis madam, please let Clemis madam ask her question. Wagmari, please.
Let Dinesh ji finish his questions, then we'll go to Clemis.
Sorry, can you repeat your question, Dinesh ji?
Yeah, it means you mean to say that external stimulus will always be there.
That is life, is it not? When you are in contact with the world, sensations must arise. But do we have to react to those stimuli? Or can we be observant of the stimuli?
Thank you, Mr. Gopalan. I think Clemis wants to ask something. Yes, Clemis, go ahead.
Yeah, I would like to say something and ask Mr. Gopalan about this. See, I feel that the problem is life happens naturally. We have lost this capacity to live naturally when we gave so much emphasis to the mind. And now we want to rationalize everything, we want to understand everything, and we cannot accept that there are certain things that the mind cannot understand. That's it. But there is a way of understanding which is beyond the mind, but the mind cannot be quiet to let that understanding which is beyond come. And my question is, when Krishnamurti talks about this effortlessness, which does not mean doing nothing, but is this effortlessness not just this natural way of human beings to live, which means give, or rather let mind find its proper place, let mind be quiet and let life happen. But we want to direct life, we want to tell life how to behave, how to be, how to happen. We should not die now, we should die whenever we want. What do we know about all this? So, and about this corona situation, my feeling is that this has been created by our own ignorance. And now ignorance wants to find a solution. It won't happen. By our a natural way of life. So to say, we are disconnected from nature. We live in places where we don't hear a bird singing for years, and we have become so unnatural. So that's what I wanted to say. And I don't think my mind can really understand much. It really has to be quiet and find its own quietness and peace. So to let life happen.
Yes. So the question which Krishnamurti asked is, can intelligence operate thought? We think that we have to operate, we have to control, we have to plan, we have to do everything. And this we is just me, my ego, my image, etc., etc. But there is a life which has brought us here. If that life could bring us this far, doesn't that life energy have the capability of operating this intellect also? What does it mean to flow with that life? Our ego, our thought seems to always be to try and dominate everything else. But is that possible at all?
Thank you, Mr. Gopalan. I think Harshi wants to say something, and then Mr. Shankar Rao.
So I wanted to say something about this group. My perception of it is, which I may be wrong, so please correct me, that this is sort of a dialogue, that we are in the same position as those 7 blind men or wise men or whatever, where each of us really putting forth for everybody to see what we see of mind, of brain, of anything that we talk about. And that we are on an equal footing here, that we are, everyone's perception is valuable. Everyone needs to be treated equally, because in the end, it's what, for each person, it's what you see, not what somebody else is saying. That is important. And so, I mean, some questions are asked, and if you don't mind, I don't want to offend anyone, but particularly Dinesh ji, I would like to say to you that I would very much love to hear what your views are on the things that you talk about. What do you see of it? What is it? You ask a lot of questions, and they're good questions. But I would, as a participant in this, I would be very glad to hear what your views are. And this I extend to everybody else. What do you see? What is insight? Have you seen the operation of insight? Do you have something that you think of as insight? Perhaps you don't, perhaps you do. I don't know. It would be interesting for all of us, I think, because that's all that we are doing. We're on the same footing of ignorance, if you like, which is not total ignorance. We also see things somewhat. It's not that. And personally, I don't think anybody is a great expert. I may have read more and I've had more to do with Krishnamurti than some people, but that doesn't make me an expert. It just means I have a little bit more knowledge about what he said. That's all. I may not even have understood it that very well. So anybody, even somebody who's read one talk and who has had an insight or not, or whatever, has, I think, something to contribute, which I would be very interested in hearing. That's.
Dinesh ji, you want
Can
to
I
say
answer?
something? Yeah.
Can I answer
Please.
this?
Yes, please.
Sir, since Harsha sir has asked personally to me, so I would just like to say what I am trying to do. I am talking about myself only because he has addressed to me. What Krishna ji has said, that you have to go in communion with the other, whosoever is the speaker. So I just want to try to go into the communion with the person. Say if I am talking to Mr. Harshad, then by his whatever his experience is, whatever his views are, whatever his insights are, everybody has got some understanding of the Krishnamurti. So we are just trying to be in communion with the speaker so that we can gather. What I feel that if I talk to Mr. Harsh sir and I listen to him carefully, then I get the whole picture what is created inside him, and I try to be in communion with him so that I can live a life what he has lived. That's what my personal experience is. When I listen to somebody at that great depth, I automatically get the whatever his understanding and whatever his experience is and what his insights are in the subject. So it's a very enriching experience for me as far as I am concerned. So I think this answers the question. What Harsha sir has to say.
So may I respond to that?
Yes, sir.
See, whenever we hear anybody, there are always responses in our own mind. When I hear somebody, there is always a response in my own mind. What I feel about it, what I think about it, whether I agree with it, whether I don't agree with it, whether it makes me think of something else. Those are my responses, different from. Now, what would be interesting is, I think, to hear those responses too. It's good that you're asking questions. I'm not saying you shouldn't. I'm just saying that your own immediate responses, which means being aware of one's own responses. I hear Gopalanji, he says experiencing. I have a response in my mind, which is experiencing. That's not what I mean by experiencing. Let me put out what I mean by experiencing. Maybe I'm not saying he's wrong or I'm right, but maybe to me, this is dialogue, right? That I'm also not just asking to clarify one person, which kind of makes him an expert, but there is a flow between us, backwards and forwards. Hey, this is how I see it. This is how you see it. So this is my concept, if you like, of dialogue, right? And I understand what you're saying about making things clearer, which I do sometimes as well. What somebody is helping somebody to clarify what they're saying. That's also an important thing to do.
Thank you, Harshit. Thank you. I think we'll have Mr. Shankar Rao and then Harshad ji, the last question. Yeah. Mr. Shankar Rao, please.
Good morning, Gopalan sir. Today I felt very happy because the way you spoke is very, very, very subtle, and you connected things so beautifully. I always used to say, my friends, that Krishnamurti ji has taken a movie, but he has not edited the movie properly and made a person understand from starting to the ending. He took shots of a movie and left it. So the person who saw all the shots still cannot connect the whole movie. So today you connected so well with whatever I understood. My question to now is, I don't like to see a man as a man. I just want to see as a bundle of thoughts, memories, or whatever Krishnamurti says, images, beliefs, 100 words, whatever it is. Totally, as somebody said, software. I don't want to even use the sensitivity, because in those days, Krishnamurti ji was there. There's no artificial intelligence. He could not imagine it could be like this. So now, a robo can do everything what a man can do. There is no need of sensitivity and all that. So can I say that man is nothing but if a man is coming, my friend is coming. If I say my friend is coming or is a very good man, I mean to say the thoughts are coming. There's nothing like thoughts good and bad. Thought is a thought. Can I see in this way, sir, or I'm totally absurd? Thank you.
Sir, I didn't completely understand what your question was, but since you talked so much about robots and computers, I'd like to only ask you, a computer can only carry out instructions. It has to be programmed. So the person who writes that program, he has to, in a sense, know beyond the computer, because the computer can't do more than what he says. And this whole business of artificial intelligence, we are not questioning what is artificial intelligence. We mean by that this process of adding knowledge from experience. The first time you play a chess game with a computer, you defeat it. Second time, you defeat it. Third time onwards, it defeats you because it has understood the way you work. That is at one level. But is there something beyond this whole movement of insight where you in one instance see the totality of it? Can anything created by thought ever be able to do that? Can any machine ever be able to do that? However bright and capable that machine is, if we allow ourselves to be dominated by the machine, if we allow our brains to go to sleep, yes. But I think so long as we are questioning, that living quality in us is always be in a position to question what that machine can do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gopalan. I think we'll have the last comment or question. Harshadbhai, please go ahead.
Yes. What generally happens that people, when they read Krishnamurti or listen to him, they are gathering some kinds of ideas and through insight. But I feel that that is not the correct way. We have to forget also what Krishnamurti has said and looking at ourselves without all that knowledge which we have gathered. And that is freedom at the beginning. And without that, we will have so many questions, whether what is insight, what is perception, and so many words. So is it possible to be free from the knowledge which we have gathered from Krishnamurti and really look at ourselves how these thoughts are arising? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Harshadbhai. Sushilji, should we close now?
Sir, you have to say thanks and then declare the next lecture, Sunday lecture. It's the must. And one thing more I wanted to say, sir has to come back in August, month of August.
Yeah,
I have talked to Gopalan sir and he has agreed it. So any date we can give him in August.
We'll be in touch with Mr. Gopalan.
Yeah.
Next week, we'll have Mr. Ravindranath Reddy. He's also an ex-parent of the Valley School who had met Krishnaji in 1984, and it changed the course of his life. So we'll have him next Sunday. With these words, I want to thank Mr. Gopalan once again. It's very nice, great to have you, sir, and you brought in lots of new perspective to the issues that we discussed. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you, Dubey sir. And I have to speak in between because of the Indore circle only. If people ask more and more questions, then I have to interfere in between. But maybe that correct or maybe incorrect. I leave it to everybody. But I wanted to give others should get also the opportunity to ask the question. One should not ask the question every time.
Okay.
That's all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Please. Thank you. Please close. Kamlesh ji, please close.